Hi, this is Ed, and welcome back to Global TV Talk Show. As you see, I'm in the space station looking down on the world behind me. See that? Blue sky, blue water. Our very special guest today is Mark D. Walker, and he is a businessman and an author, entrepreneur. Welcome back.
Thanks, Ed. It's great to be back. I appreciate it.
Yeah, 2 years. Wow,
2 years almost to the day. Yeah.
that's great. Well, we're going to talk about the Million Mile Walker.com. You actually walked 1 million miles, or that's just a great name?
Oh, I'm still working on it. And you're the one who gave that great moniker to it as well. You said, would you walk 1 million miles for a cause you believed in? Well, Mark did. So I appreciate that. It's on my website.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Wow. So where are you talking from? Where are you located?
Scottsdale, Arizona.
Uh-huh. So it's only a 113 today?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Only. That's right. No, it's
Yeah.
been straight. It's been triple digits for weeks and weeks now. Fortunately, we were in Guatemala for part of it. We'll talk about that later on, I'm sure. But ever since we got back a couple of weeks ago, it's been triple digits. So that's just the way it is for a while.
Yeah. So I understand. So we have a two condo units owned and operated for about 20 years as a business at Anasazi Village, and they're both rented now. But the people hang out in the pool and
Yes,
inside. Uh,
exactly.
yeah, and then they go over to Scottsdale area and just some of the malls and hang out and walk around.
Although some of the malls have been closed. The Paradise Valley Mall just closed, and they're doing a whole new make around. They're putting in condos, and then there'll be a few stores down below, but it looks a lot different. So as you know, the whole mall world has changed quite a bit, and that's happening here in Scottsdale.
Yeah, at the Cactus Mall area, with J.C. Penney's, I think, is still operating, but everything else is uh,
That's right.
being converted.
Right.
Uh,
We live about 5 minutes from there.
okay, that's great. So, Mark, tell me about this book. You took your family with you to Guatemala?
Actually, this time we took two granddaughters.
Uh-huh.
And I'll explain that later on. That's a little bit different way of travel, and there were some reasons for that, but we're at a point in our life where it was time to start taking some grandkids.
Well, that's very, very interesting. Okay, so why Guatemala?
Well, Guatemala was where I was based as a Peace Corps volunteer back in the 70s. Met my wife there. We had all three kids there. I worked with Care International on my first consulting job there. It was a set up a Guatemalan development agency while I was there, and also was an assistant director for Plan International and a consultant for cooperative housing and a few other groups. So Guatemala is my second home. I've written a lot about it, and that's why the latest book is the Guatemala Reader.
That's really interesting. When you were in the Peace Corps, what kind of work did you do? And keep in mind the reason for this question is because our audience is worldwide, although probably 75% US, but mostly younger. And the Peace Corps is something from history. So tell the audience what
Well,
it actually was.
it's not that much in the history. It's still a viable group, and there are thousands of volunteers around the world. Now, interestingly, it was actually shut down in 2020. And I have one of the chapters in my book is called 60 Years of Peace Corps in Guatemala. And it gives the entire history of how it's changed since the early 60s and the 70s when I was a volunteer. And incidentally, I was involved in fertilizer experiments, even though I'd never farmed in my entire life, but that's the way the Peace Corps went. They taught me Spanish in Puerto Rico, agriculture in Costa Rica, and sent me to the highest department of Guatemala as a volunteer. So that's how it worked then, and it's still a viable organization, although they put a lot more emphasis on security than they used to. In other words, you can't just jump on a bus like I used to do and go wherever. Yeah, there's a whole protocol now.
Okay, so how old was your granddaughters?
I took a 9-year-old and a 22-year-old with me.
Well, I think that was a smart idea to structure it that way, because that way you have caring help.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so were you in the countryside or in an urban environment?
I was in a very isolated area called Ixijuan, which was by Tajamuco, the highest volcano in Central America. And the reason that I chose that site was because I knew nobody would be speaking English. And so that forced me to learn good Spanish. Although, most of the words that I was taught by my fellow workers, Guatemalan workers, I knew all the dirty words. That was my strength, I think, really. But my wife, who's Guatemalan, is a teacher. She's been working on me for the last 50 years, so now it's pretty good. And we speak it at home, and all of our kids, and now some of the grandkids are speaking Spanish as well.
Well, this is full immersion. I'm really happy to have you talking about this. Okay, so could you please hold up the front cover of this book? Show our audience what it is. Now, how old is that little girl
That
at the
girl,
at the time?
that girl is 6.
Okay. And why what was adorable for sure, but what was the reason for honoring her with that symbolic gesture?
Well, I know the photographer, and he's a friend. He lives in Lake Atitlan. He took the photograph, and he sends his photographs periodically on Facebook. And I love this one. I asked him, could I use it? He said yes. So on this last trip, I took a copy of the book, which I signed, of course, handed it him to thank him for giving me the rights to the photograph, which he didn't charge me for. The next day, unbeknownst to me, he went to that village where the little girl Albina lives in Catarina Polopo, and showed her the book. She loved it. She gave him a big hug, and then he took a picture of the little 6-year-old with the book. She was now 16 years old. So it's the 16-year-old girl with the book with her face on the cover. So that's the story behind the cover. And it just sort of unfolded during this last trip.
So when you were in the Peace Corps going back um, in the 70s, was there trouble there in that area?
There was a lot of unrest. I was threatened with my life several times. There was a lot of violence going on. Towards the early 80s, it got even worse, and that they call the violence period. For 10 years, there was violence between the army and the guerrillas, and a lot of that was happening up in the highlands. And so the Mayan indigenous people were sort of in between these two forces. 200,000 were killed, millions were forced to abandon the country, and that's had an impact on the country ever since. And I have to mention on the side that there was some U.S. involvement in the change of government, which generated that conflict. In other words, there was an overthrow of a democratically elected government by a guy by the name of Juan Arevalo and Jacobo Arbenz. So there's a lot of history there. Some of the stories in my book go back and explain that. And what I try to do in the book as well, Ed, is to provide Guatemalans with an opportunity with Guatemalan anthropologists, writers, poets, and the opportunity to share their story and their perspective on what the history has been and how it's impacted the country and where they're at today.
Okay, and so the time frame, once again, when you were in the Peace Corps, that was late 70s?
Early 70s, but
Early.
I stayed around for 8 or 9 years before I got my degree and came back. So I mean, I've been in and out of Guatemala for about 50 years now.
Okay, so what is the book about?
Well, the book is really a profile of Guatemalan Mayan leaders, advocates, writers, and poets. I focus on biographical sketches, and also I have some what I call amazing stories. And at the back of the book, I have maps, graphs, fact sheets, and photographs to really support some of the 18 stories told by these Guatemalans. And some of the people that I highlight include Victor Montejo, who's a Mayan anthropologist, author. He's written over 20 books, and he talks about the Mayan worldview. Francisco Goldman, who wrote The Art of Political Murder, that was picked up by HBO and made a award-winning documentary. And another story was called The Making of the Kingdom of Mezcal, which is a fascinating story. We don't have time to go in it now, but it's about a story that was written by a German guy who married a Guatemalan who was a Mayan Indian. She was taken from her home to Germany, and she became an artist. And she's the one who did the paintings that are in this fabulous book that I talk about. And on this last trip, I met the son and the daughter-in-law of Nan Kus, who was the Mayan artist.
So the Mayan is spelled Mayan.
Right. So the Maya population is about 50% of the population still. So it's amazing when you go back, starting with this is the 500th anniversary of the conquering of Guatemala by the Spaniards. And of course, a lot of the hierarchy, a lot of the systems of control, etc., were set up by the Spaniards, and that's had an impact throughout the history. So there's a lot being written right now, and some of it is actually in the pages of some of these Mayan the intellectuals and writers that I highlight in my book that talk about that history and that impact.
So what was the source of, it's probably more than one source, but what was the source of all the trouble in that area? Was it a
Well, a lot
communist
of it was
influence, or was
a
just
lot of it
what?
was control of land. Now you remember one of the most influential corporations in the history of Guatemala was United Fruit.
Oh yeah,
And it just so happened that the head of the CIA and the head of the State Department were brothers, and they both had stock in United Fruit. So we had a very strong vested interest in Guatemala. And the United Fruit had to throw a lot of people off their land in order to control the amount of land they needed to really develop this incredible empire, which in fact expanded to Honduras, Costa Rica, I think El Salvador. So it was a very consequential, large corporation. And the attitude of the State Department at that time is whatever is good for United Fruit is good for America. And that was a real tragedy. And unfortunately, there are still big corporations in Guatemala that are, controlling certain resources that they need to displace people for one reason or another. So it's a long history, but really the problem was land, and it was control, and it was also control the cheap labor force, because the indigenous groups were the ones who went down to the south coast where the coffee and the sugar cane, and they provide the cheap labor. So cheap labor, land, those that really supported an elite group that controlled the resources and the politics of the country was the issue.
got it. So that's not Dole, that's United Fruit.
Well, You
I
know,
think there's some relations there.
I think they probably do. They change names, but this is the big banana corporation, and it was at that time it was called Chiquita Banana.
Yes, I remember the blue sticker. Right.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Right.
I'm just taking notes. Okay. All right. So we don't really need to name names, but that Alan Dulles and that group.
Right. The Dulles
Yeah,
brothers, exactly.
got it. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the safety issues. You came through okay, obviously, and want to go back frequently. So you're comfortable. The family's comfortable.
Well, there are a couple of things. First off, you have to be sensitive to parts of the country where you shouldn't, that there are problems, there's violence, there's robberies, etc. You just can't go by yourself. You need to go with people that know who's what, and etc. Now we have the advantage that we have a family there. And as a matter of fact, when we took the two granddaughters, we did a family gathering. Over 50 people came. So this gives the children, the grandkids, an opportunity to meet their long lost cousins, second, third cousins, and family members, and really get to know them. And hopefully, these are relationships with which extend into the future. But you see, that's the advantage of that is you have people all over the country who tell you what's going on, where to be, where not to be. And my wife's brother and sister-in-law, they were with us a good part of the way. And actually, when we needed a four-wheel drive vehicle, they had one. So that, you have to be careful. You want to work with professionals, or in our case, have family on the ground that can give you a heads up on where to be and where not to be and when.
Okay, so let's talk about I like how you put it, the yin and yang of travel through Guatemala with granddaughters, and one just returned, you said.
No, they both, everybody came back safely, fortunately.
Good.
Now, my brother, my son, he took daughter-in-law was stuck in Dallas for 2 days. My son wasted a day and a half going to Guatemala and then Salvador, then Guatemala, then Miami, and then they took him back. Fortunately, we went with United and there was no problem. But international travel has gotten a lot more interesting. The good news is we all came back safe and sound.
Okay, good. Okay, so tell me about the vaccinations or any problems with
So we checked
disease
with our
or
doctor ahead of time, and he gave us the basic things. So you have to have tetanus, and then there's one shot that represents four different things. So you have to check with your doctor ahead of time, get those things taken care of. It's really not a big deal. And one of this was one of the rare times we took malaria medication. I usually don't do that, but they suggested it, and we're going up into the jungle. We went up to Tikal, into the Mayan ruins up there, which is a fascinating place, important place for the grandkids to see, but it's just filled with mosquitoes, among other things. So you've got to protect yourself. You have to know where you're going. So what you wear and what type of medications you might need, it also depends on which part of the country you're going to be going in and the extent to which you're going to be in a nice hotel with air conditioning, or you're going to be out amongst in the wild, so to speak.
got it. Okay. All right, let's talk about food and diet. Is it now,
Well, Guatemala
when
has
you're in the city, I'm sure it's normal, but when you're not in the city, then it's all local, right?
we had a lot of fun. We went to a couple of places, and the granddaughters ate some things that they'd never tried before. But the major diet in Guatemala is based on corn and beans and squash. I mean, that's the way it's always been. We love black beans. We always eat black beans and tortillas around here anyway. So that didn't shock the grandkids at all. There are some very exotic fruits there, different types of papayas and different types of strange fruits and this sort of thing that we get to try out and have for breakfast, melons and papayas and different things like that. So that makes things nice, and great fruit juices. So food really is not that big a deal. I mean, we just warn the grandkids not to be getting food off of the street or, from vendors and this sort of thing. I mean, if you're not adapted to the local uh, little bacteria that are going around, that could be a problem.
Got it.
But
Okay.
we didn't have any trouble at all, and we enjoyed the food. And it was, lots of fruit and lots of good coffee too, and chocolate. Those
I
are
I
those
bet.
are all
Yeah.
nice things that the kids enjoyed too.
Yeah. So is this uh, an issue with elevation?
No, not. I mean, what you eat and how you dress, of course, depends on the altitude to agree. But Guatemala is called the land of eternal spring, and Guatemala City is up at a few thousand feet, so it's not that hot. Now, when you get down, as I mentioned, either on the south coast or up in Tikal, that is tropical, hot, humid weather. I mean, when we were up at Tikal, it was 90 degrees and over 90% humidity. So that's not easy to get used to. Now, as far as altitude is concerned, I have to say, when I was a Peace Corps volunteer, I was told this was a tropical country. And after I was on the bus for about 5 or 6 hours, I was freezing and I had to get a sweater part of the way up. It ends up my site was outside of Ishihuan, which is over 10,000 feet. So there's a lot of variety. You have to know it's not all the same, and it's all not tropical, and it's not always an eternal spring either.
Interesting. So the sub so I'm on your website right now, and it says in the intro, celebrating international travel and literature, cross-cultural relationships, overseas development, philanthropy, and social justice. Talk about philanthropy.
Well, I was an executive fundraiser for 35 years. I was a certified fundraiser with the Association of Fundraising Professionals, which means every 3 years you have to take a test to prove that you raised a certain amount of money, that you raised different types. You raise money with different types of approaches, and that you adhere to certain level of ethics, and also that you are actively involved in promoting philanthropy and the profession. So I was also the president of the association here in Arizona. We had about 300 members. And so I went to Mexico on 3 occasions to teach about global philanthropy with fundraisers from throughout Latin America. So I've been involved with fundraising. I was the VP for Make-A-Wish International, did raise money for CARE, Food for the Hungry, make a lot of different groups, and a CEO at Hagar, which works with survivors of human trafficking. So I've had to raise a lot of money for all international causes that I believe in, and so I guess that's my specialty.
That's great. Okay. Okay. So I'm looking at your website, and there's a lot of stuff there. And the website, why don't you recite what the website is? It'll be a lot
Yeah, it's
faster.
it's millionmilewalker.com. And right on the front screen, you go down just a little bit, it says click here to stay informed. And that's where you can sign up for my monthly newsletter, which is the Million Mile Walker Dispatch. And that's where I write stories like my last one, which was about travel to Guatemala and grandchildren, and how we change the way we travel and how we travel based on where we are in life. I also talk about social justice issues, like some of the things we were talking about previously. I talk about different movies and books. A lot of times I'll have one or two of my book reviews on there, because on my website, I have about 80 book reviews. So I'm always reviewing books and sharing it with individuals. A lot of it relates to Latin America, the different cultures, to the things that I promote and I'm involved with.
Mark Walker, thank you for being my guest again on Global TV Talk Show. Just to be sure that this can be effective for you and your purposes, what else would you like to chat about in the closing minutes here?
Well, one thing I wanted to mention at the end of my book, I have a section called "What Can I Do?" And what I do is I list four organizations, charities that I've worked over the years. I've known the founders, etc. I just became a member of Seeds for a Future, which focuses on malnutrition, which is one of the biggest problems in Guatemala. They work directly with the women, promote a good development process, and they stick with the women for a full year to really properly support them. So it's a group that I believe in, that I've seen before. And there are a couple of other groups, Advanced Guatemala, Cultural Survival, and Namaste Direct, which works with microenterprise. So I think it's important that we are involved in promoting groups that make changes and support local groups. And the last thing I want to mention is, I'm still involved with PEN America. The amount of book banning going on in the US continues to grow, 4,300 book bannings just in this year alone so far. So PEN America represents writers and publishers all over the world, and they're promoting free expression. And I'm also a board member of the Arizona Authors Association that promotes different activities, including a contest which is going on right now, which I think about 20 or 25 authors from Arizona will be involved with and will receive some type of recognition, which I think is important.
Fascinating. Thank you, Mark. Nice to see you again.
Great seeing you, Ed. I appreciate it.
Peace.
Peace. Thank you.
This is Ed signing off. Thank you.
Okay, Ed. Thank you.
Thank you.